The United States was shocked when Rick Harrison, who was once called the living encyclopedia of reality TV, was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The picture of him leaving the federal courthouse in handcuffs became the most shared image of the week. But what really shocked people wasn't what he was sentenced to. Rick's unusually unstable, contradictory, and heated reaction in court, where he had always kept a calm demeanor throughout his career. In a dramatic and unprecedented confrontation, he raised his voice, slammed the table, and openly challenged the judge and prosecutors. Rick was once a TV personality who taught viewers about historical value and the ethics of trade. Now he is accused of being the mastermind behind an international network of artifact smuggling money. Rick Harrison was found guilty of money laundering and tax evasion. The perfect reputation he had built up over more than 15 years is now at risk of falling apart. The case has caused academics and the public to argue about whether this is the dramatic fall of a pop culture icon or the result of a deeper conspiracy that no one has fully uncovered. Most importantly, what was really going through Rick Harrison's mind when he heard the verdict? Let's look into that in today's video. 2009. People were fascinated by Rick Harrison's unusual antiques and the way he turned each one into a living piece of history. The way he looked at a Roman coin or an 18th century map and immediately told the story of its history, context, and value made people think he wasn't just a trader, but a guardian of heritage and a scholar dressed as a businessman. This made him seem almost untouchable to the public at a time when media power often overshadowed knowledge. Rick stood out as Rick's personal philosophy was simple but strong. I know what I'm doing, and I know I'm always right. It wasn't just a statement, it was a way of life that had carried him through the years. He believed that knowledge could protect him from all risks, which was a tragic irony because that belief would later become an invisible chain that held him together. Being successful in a niche job like dealing antiques led Rick to develop what could be called an emotional immunity mechanism that kept him from feeling the effects of market risks. He had to deal with accusations and even jealousy from competitors, but he always came out on top, sometimes by using logic and sometimes by keeping his cool. Over time, this armor got thicker, and Rick rarely let himself react with pure emotion. He learned to hide everything behind a serious face and a steady voice. In reality TV, where emotions are often exaggerated, Rick became a contrarian. The quieter he was, the more attention he got, but this over-controlling his emotions led him to a state of there was a psychological imbalance, a growing sense of arrogance, and a blind belief that he was unbeatable because no one had ever been able to bring him down. Then there were the rumors. A vague social media post that couldn't be confirmed said that Rick Harrison was being investigated by federal authorities for tax evasion and the illegal trade of undocumented artifacts. Rick's first reaction was a slight smirk, half amused, half dismissive. This will blow over, he told a friend in the business. It wasn't a reassurance, it was a confirmation of his belief that he was invincible. For Rick, public accusations or gossip columns were just background noise that he had learned to ignore over the years. He saw the situation as a short-lived summer media storm that would pass, which showed that he hadn't yet grasped how serious the situation was. This was the start of his trust crisis denial from a psychological point of view. People who are in positions of power for long periods of time often react in this way. People who are admired and influenced often build up a strong ego defense system. They see everything going on around them as small parts of a problem they've already solved. They don't notice the changes in people's looks, the colder questions from reporters, or the growing tide of suspicion because they aren't tuned in to danger signals in their environment. Rick was no different. What's interesting is that even as these rumors started to gain credibility when details from the federal investigations came out, Rick's behavior didn't change. he didn't hold press conferences to explain what was going on or file any legal rebuttals. Instead, he kept an almost unnervingly calm attitude. Many people praised this as manly composure, but from a psychological point of view, it was a form of emotional paralysis that people often experience when they can't accept that the world they've built falls apart. Rick's calmness at the time wasn't deliberate poise. It was a psychological defense mechanism. The irony is that Rick's past success made him blind to his flaws. He used to be able to quickly assess information and negotiate with precision, but now he was facing a deal that no book had ever prepared him for, a verdict on his own character and life's values, and he was woefully unprepared for it. In Rick's mind at that time, he probably had two opposing thoughts at the same time. On the one hand, he held on to the belief that he was innocent, even though he couldn't admit it yet. He started to feel a vague but growing unease. This was the moment when emotional resistance began to build, even if it wasn't yet obvious. Rick kept going to the shop to talk to his employees and take pictures with tourists, but the sharpness in his eyes had gone away and been replaced by something that looked like doubt about himself. This was the first crack in his mental armor, a small, unseen crack that would eventually become a big one. The arrest happened on a bright April morning in 2023 as the sun rose over Las Vegas. Suddenly, an unmarked convoy of black vehicles stopped in front of the gold and silver pawn shop, which had been associated with Rick Harrison for over 20 years. There were no sirens or other signs of force, just silent figures in black suits with badges on their lapels walking inside. Within minutes, Rick's normal life came to an end, and he was led out of his home by agents from the FBI, the IRS, and the U.S. Department of Cultural Heritage to protection. His hands weren't tied, but he wasn't free either. There were no protests or resistance, just a heavy, deafening silence. Some employees in the shop broke down in tears, and a few quickly took videos of the incident that went viral on social media within hours, spreading like wildfire. Rick's behavior caught everyone off guard. He didn't look angry or scream like many famous people do in similar situations. The way he walked, as if he were walking onto a familiar stage, caught the attention of psychologists. It was this calmness, with a hint of pride on the face, that led them to think Rick might be showing a state called high-level emotional detachment. This is a natural defense mechanism that the brain sets off in response to severe psychological trauma. People in this state don't show clear emotions because they are strong, but because their minds haven't yet processed the Rick's mind, probably couldn't accept that he, who had been a symbol of knowledge, ethics, and cultural integrity, was now being treated like a criminal. During the search and preliminary questioning, Rick neither resisted nor confessed. Instead, he kept almost complete silence, communicating only with short, controlled responses and steady eye contact. This behavior made it clear that Rick was still trying to keep control over his emotions. It was unclear whether Rick's public image, at least on the outside, was really strong or just the start of an internal collapse. His arrest immediately caused two opposing waves of public opinion. On the one hand, supporters rallied under hashtags like #HatFreeRick, saying he was the victim of a political witch hunt. On the other hand, skeptics who had long doubted the honesty of the deals on porn stars saw this as definitive proof of wrongdoing. There were Reddit threads, Twitter debates, and YouTube commentaries. Erupted with hundreds of discussions, but Rick stayed quiet. His silence was seen in many ways. Was he a cunning plan to buy time, or was he emotionally drained and unable to speak up for his family, especially his eldest son Corey, who had been groomed to take over the shop? The shock was unbearable. In a short interview after Rick's arrest, Corey said, "I still don't understand what's happening. My dad never did anything wrong, at least that's what I think." Rick kept his problems hidden from everyone, even his closest family. Rick's family didn't know about the investigations that had been going on in the background for months. This meant that Rick had chosen to carry the weight of the situation alone. Or maybe he didn't think it was necessary to share at all with longtime friends and co-workers, especially those who had worked with him on porn stars like Austin Chumley Russell, or the historical experts who often appeared on the Rick was so serious and careful that it was almost rigid. "If he's guilty, I don't know what to believe anymore," said an anonymous friend. The trust in Rick wasn't just personal, it represented something larger, a collective belief in knowledge integrity and the archetype of the self-made American success story. His downfall was more than a legal matter, it was a crack forming in the cultural psyche. Shortly after his arrest, Rick was released on bond. Conditional bail while he waited his trial. He didn't say anything in public, avoided social media, and wouldn't meet with reporters. For the first time in over 15 years, Rick was completely out of the public eye. This is what modern psychology calls a functional depression. People in this state can still work, socialize, and do daily tasks, but on the inside they are empty, distant, and scared. Reports said that Rick continued to visit the porn shop for a few hours every day, but he no longer talked to customers or he stopped interacting with employees in the same way he used to, took down all the posters and cameras inside the shop, and turned it into a cold, quiet place that reflected the founder's inner turmoil. As the trial approached, investigators brought a mountain of evidence with them. The claims included tax evasion through unreported artifact sales and the use of middlemen to buy and sell artifacts that were thought to be stolen. The case files got thicker by the day. The public felt more and more guilty about Rick's actions, but that didn't mean he wasn't affected. In fact, his lack of reaction meant he was probably going through the worst part of his emotional crisis. According to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's theory on the psychological response to loss, Rick was probably bargaining and self-blame. Behind closed doors, he might have been asking himself, did I trust myself too much? Was there a time in the past when I went astray without deep down? Rick knew the answer was yes. In a surprising move during this time, Rick went on a few conservative talk shows and said he was the target of a political conspiracy. He said that his success and unusual rise in a traditional system had made him a scapegoat. This was a calculated move, but it also showed that Rick wasn't relying on logic alone anymore. Instead, he was leaning on conspiracy theories as a way to avoid facing a reality that was too painful for him to accept at this point. He wasn't the friendly guy who would take low-ball offers or happily talk about the history of a samurai sword. He had changed into someone distant and guarded, and he had lost the public's trust. As the storm got closer, it was the public trial, the verdict, and the inevitable face with the abyss that awaited a man who once thought he was unbeatable. The historic trial of Rick Harrison began on February 12, 2025, at the Federal Court of the District of Nevada, marking one of over 60 press agencies were given permission to report live from outside the courthouse, giving the case a lot of international coverage. There were about 200 people in the courtroom, including heritage conservation activists, museum representatives, legal experts, and a few loyal fans of porn stars who were chosen through a lottery system. The trial lasted 18 days and included testimony from 11 prosecution witnesses. In the beginning of the trial, Rick Harrison was charged with 23 criminal offenses. These included tax evasion 7 times, money laundering 6 times, illegal transactions involving cultural property 4 times, conspiracy to obstruct evidence 3 times, and accounting fraud 3 times. The charges were based on the results of an investigation that lasted almost 14 months and was done by the FBI, the IRS, and the U.S. Department of Cultural Heritage Protection. He cooperated with his lawyers at first, but things got worse when the prosecution presented physical and electronic evidence, such as internal emails recording encrypted conversations with middlemen, unrecorded financial invoices, and a dual black ledger system that showed over $12 million worth of untaxed artifact transactions. Day 6 of the trial was a turning point when lead prosecutor William H. Deca showed a series of encrypted messages between Rick Harrison and an international artifact dealer in Spain. The messages described an agreement to hide the source of a set of 18th-century military documents with seals from a well-known British university. When this evidence was shown on a big screen in court, Rick suddenly got up and demanded to speak, even though his defense lawyer, David Marshall, tried to stop him. Rick insisted on expressing his anger, saying, "I have almost never received any documents that have been identified as stolen property." This was the prosecution's intention, Rick said out loud, his voice clear but tense. Judge Michael K. Davidson told him to sit down and only speak when he was allowed to. Rick replied, "Then who will defend my honor? The media out there has convicted me before this court even has." The court then took a 45-minute break to let the lawyers get back in control of the situation. Rick's sudden and direct reaction shocked many in the courtroom, because he had been known for keeping his cool up until that point. The mood in the courtroom became more tense as both sides argued strongly about the admissibility of certain pieces of evidence, especially data from Rick's personal phone, which the defense said had been illegally accessed between days 9 and 13. The prosecution, on the other hand, focused on Rick's alleged manipulation of accounting records, specifically over 173 items worth between $5,000 and $80,000 each were found to have been sent from the official accounting system but were not recorded. Some of the artifacts were later found to have come from thefts at museums in West Virginia, Texas, and Florida. However, the ownership of many of the items has not been proven. The defense said that some of the artifacts were bought and sold by third parties, who had nothing to do with the pawn shop's official business. However, the prosecution showed surveillance footage of Rick telling employees to label and store special artifacts in a temporarily holding area without recording them in the inventory system. The footage was timestamped August 2021 on day 16. Defense attorney David Marshall again asked the judge to drop the charges against Rick for the illegal trade of cultural property, saying there wasn't enough proof that he knew the artifacts came from illegal sources. The judge denied the motion, saying a long-standing failure to ensure accountability in transactions of significant value is sufficient grounds to establish systematic criminal. Rick Harrison was able to speak to the court on the last day of the trial. He did not plead guilty, but he did say, "I may have let my emotions and experience overshadow legal principles." His statement lasted 4 minutes, and then the court adjourned for 48 hours to deliberate. On March 3, 2025, at exactly 9:00 a.m., the courtroom was packed with people. Judge Michael K. Davidson gave the sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, saying that the crimes were committed on purpose, went on for a long time, and did a lot of damage to the country's historical assets. As soon as Rick heard the verdict, he became very angry. He slammed the table down and yelled at the prosecutor, "This is not justice." Security officers quickly restrained him and told him to stay calm. Defense attorney David Marshall asked for the right to appeal and a stay of execution of the sentence so that a clemency petition could be heard, but both requests were turned down by the court. The picture of Rick, dressed in a gray suit with his hands cuffed, being led out of the courtroom in front of dozens of cameras, became the most shared image on social media that week. Within 48 hours, a video of the sentencing had over 9 million views on YouTube. Rick was sent to the Federal Correctional Complex in Victorville, California, a facility for high-profile federal inmates without parole. As part of his sentence, he is not allowed to talk to the media or write a memoir while he is serving his time. 3 weeks later, Rick's lawyers filed an appeal, saying that a life sentence is too harsh for someone with no violent or criminal history. The appellate court has not yet made a decision, and the trial has ended. The verdict of Rick Harrison's trial became the most talked about topic on Twitter, YouTube, and Google Trends in the U.S. within 24 hours, and the life sentence was handed down on March 3, 2025. The case's effects are expected to last for years to come. Over 40 million searches for the keyword Rick Harrison life sentence were recorded within the first 3 days, which was a lot more than the number of searches for other keywords. In high-profile cases like Johnny Depp vs. Amber Heard in 2022 or Sam Bankman-Fried vs. Sam Bankman-Fried in 2023, cable TV and online news outlets showed Rick Harrison being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs over and over again. The video of him slamming the table and criticizing the legal system got over 12 million views on YouTube in the first week alone, and media outlets picked apart every detail of his face, words, and moments of silence, treating the people's reactions to Rick's trial were very different. One group, mostly longtime fans of porn stars, saw him as a pop culture hero and started online campaigns right away calling for the sentence to be reviewed. On the other hand, heritage protection groups, historians, and museum communities around the world issued statements supporting the verdict. The American Heritage Protection Association, APA, said, "This sets a necessary legal precedent to deter illegal trade in cultural heritage, regardless of many universities and academic groups officially ended their media partnerships with porn stars, and Rick's name was taken off lists of cultural benefactors." Of Rick's family, his son, Corey Harrison, was the only one to speak out after the trial. At a short press conference in Las Vegas, Corey said, "I don't deny that what my father did was wrong, but I believe that given his contributions to culture, he deserves a chance to make amends." This statement was widely shared. Many neutral fans shared the story and showed support. Some fan groups even held prayer and candlelight vigils outside of the gold and silver porn shop, which is still open under Corey's temporary management. The case was also covered by international media, especially in Europe, where restoration and artifact preservation groups were interested. Leonard France and Deb Spiegel Germany wrote feature articles about it, calling it a wake-up call about the blurred lines between culture and crime. Japanese and South Korean authorities have started to look into transactions related to the artifacts that were worn by reality TV porn stars. At the same time, Rick Harrison was officially transferred to the Federal Correctional Complex in Victorville, California. This is a medium-security federal prison for nonviolent offenders serving long sentences. According to reports from the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Rick was classified as a Level 3 inmate, which means he is not dangerous and has a high likelihood of self-discipline and is only allowed to communicate with the outside world through letters. Rick's lawyer said that he did not protest the prison's rules and turned down all interview requests from the press during his first 3 weeks in jail. Rick did not send letters or make phone calls, staying quiet to the outside world. Prison staff said that he spent most of his time in the library reading books on ancient history and federal criminal law. However, things started to change in the 4th week. Began answering handwritten letters from fans. At first, they were just cards from schoolchildren sending him well wishes. Later, he got long letters from middle-aged viewers telling him how his show had taught them about history. Some of the letters reportedly moved him deeply, according to an anonymous mailroom worker. Rick carefully read each letter, underlined certain sentences, and kept a few for himself without replying. Another important event was Rick's request for permission to write a memoir. While federal law requires a lot of review before any commercial publication from prison, Rick's proposal to the prison administration with the working title Horned. The story I never told was the first step in reclaiming his voice, not to fight the law but to rebuild his public image. Around this time, the History Channel officially canceled all contracts related to Rick Harrison and porn stars, and all episodes featuring Rick were taken off of broadcast schedules and streaming services. In a first for American reality TV, all platforms pulled the content at the same time. This was seen as an attempt to start over and protect advertisers' and sponsors' reputations. Despite this, Rick Harrison's influence, whether positive or negative, continued to grow. Media experts said that the anti-hero of pop culture archetype that Rick now represents could become a new idea in personal brand repositioning after scandals. The main question is whether Rick Harrison can change from a convicted person into a cultural warning, symbol for future generations, the price of justification. Soon after Rick Harrison was sentenced, many scholars and experts in the fields of historical preservation and education began to speak out about a topic that had been debated in private for years: the thin line between sharing historical information and using it for personal gain. Rick Harrison's case was once seen as an example of how television could teach people about history, but now it's seen as an example of how history can be used for personal gain. Over the course of more than a decade, more than 60 universities and colleges in the US and Canada added porn stars to their lists of resources for students studying applied history, trade economics, or mass communication. Rick Harrison, who has a lot of knowledge, was invited to speak at conferences put on by the American Historical Association, AHA, and the Smithsonian. In 2016, the National Museum of American History gave him the Cultural Citizen Prize. Because of this, his downfall is not only a criminal case, but also a harsh reflection of a modern media phenomenon: the commodification of educational figures and the pricing of cultural values as items in an intellectual black market. Professor Marcus Halberstam of Columbia University said that Rick Harrison knew history so well that he could use it to his advantage. Harrison's actions, such as using his personal network to trade artifacts without clear provenance, removing identification labels, tampering with verification records, and hiding transaction histories, show that he was not just randomly involved in the gray collectibles market, where market value is more important than historical value. An internal report from the International Heritage Investigative Agency (IHC) revealed that between 2017 and 2018, Harrison was involved in the market on a regular basis. At least 47 artifacts that Rick bought through middlemen in Europe and Asia were suspected of being involved in smuggling. 3 of these pieces were confirmed to have been stolen from museums in Ukraine, Italy, and Cambodia. As a result, legal experts and academics are questioning who is responsible for regulating the commercialization of culture through the media. Some say that the reality TV industry has long made ethical justifications possible by turning shows like porn stars into pure entertainment products without any moral content. Kara Jensen of UCLA has called for new laws to govern TV shows that mix cultural and commercial elements. This was discussed at a symposium in Geneva by the International Council of Museums ICOM soon after the sentence, where people from 17 countries suggested a full review of all the artifacts that appeared on porn stars during its 15-year run. This would be done by a special multinational task force that would include groups like UNESCO and Interpol, has created a cultural division to keep track of the artifacts that come through Rick Harrison's network of deals. Beyond legal issues, questions of professional ethics are now being talked about a lot in business media and cultural academia. Many brand management courses have started using Rick as a cautionary example and comparing him to successful case studies like Elon Musk, Oprah Winfrey, or Bob Iger. The Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania has even created a model called the Harrison Effect. Looks at what happens when you give up basic principles to make short-term and positive image gains in the conservation community. The case has led to calls for stricter rules on artifact verification and declaration in the U.S. Many public and private museums have improved their systems for checking the provenance of incoming artifacts, and the Cultural Transactions Integrity Act has been proposed as a federal bill in the U.S. House of Representatives. Any artifact transaction over $500 would have to go through a federal system similar to how international financial transactions are checked. From the public's point of view, Rick Harrison is no longer seen as wise and honest. A poll by USA Today of over 15,000 people showed that 64% thought the sentence was fair and necessary as a deterrent. 21% thought it was too harsh but not unjustified. Only 8% were completely against the verdict, and 7% had no opinion. Even though people have different opinions, it seems that society's overall view has changed a lot because of the legal evidence and practical implications of the case. For example, Rick has never denied his knowledge or experience. He also didn't say he was stupid or a victim. Instead, his lawyers have always said that Rick acted based on his personal expertise in a regulatory gray area and didn't mean to hurt anyone. This brings up a bigger question: can knowledge without responsibility become a worse sin? Rick Harrison's sentencing is a cultural landmark not because it was a crime, but because it shows the bad side of unrestrained intelligence. Statements like "I do this to protect heritage by placing it in the hands of those who appreciate it," which Rick said in an interview in 2021, now seem hollow and false to the public. The price of this justification is not only a life sentence, but also the loss of status, credibility, and cultural influence built up. Even though Rick Harrison's sentence is official, things that have happened since the verdict suggest that this story is far from over, at least in the eyes of the public, the media, and the cultural industry. In a society driven by image branding and digital media, punishment is no longer just about serving time. It's also about how society remembers or redefines a person. And in this way, Rick Harrison's case is still open a week after he was sentenced. A lot of alternative media and political culture podcasts started using the case as a new example of someone who was hurt by the system. For example, on the Freedom Voices network, freelance journalist Mike Renner asked, "Is Rick Harrison the perfect example of a sensible businessman who was destroyed by an old legal system that can't keep up with the world of digital commerce?" His video got over 4.5 million views in just 5 days. At the same time, the Culture Reset podcast by media expert Kayla Duran looked at Rick's case as a tragic example of the collapse of pop culture, where the lines between entertainment and education are becoming increasingly blurred. A clear trend is emerging. Rick Harrison, who was once seen as a prisoner, is slowly becoming seen by some as the ultimate anti-hero of our time. He is no longer a perfect role model, but he is also not completely rejected either. He has become a symbol of the tension between law and morals. There is a term called Rick effect that is used to describe public figures who are broken down but still have devoted fans. At the same time, a New York-based independent documentary team has announced a film project called Horned: The Fall of a Cultural Broker, which will be released in early 2026. Film will not only focus on the court case, but also look at Rick's impact on the global antiquities trade, how reality TV turns regular people into icons, and that the project has already raised over $1.2 million on Kickstarter in just 3 weeks. At the same time, Rick's lawyers are still looking for ways to appeal the sentence. They have sent a petition to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which will be looked at in the second quarter of 2026. The petition says that the life sentence is unfair because the crimes were not violent and the defendant has made important cultural contributions. For a long time, Rick could serve the cultural community in educational institutions or national museums under strict supervision as an alternative rehabilitation model. This is seen as a possible option if society moves toward restorative justice. Another thing that will affect Rick's future image is how younger people feel about him on sites like TikTok and YouTube Shorts, where clips from old porn stars episodes featuring Rick continue to get millions of views, and comments often include phrases like "he got too real." It shows that some viewers, especially Gen Z and millennials, see Rick as more of a victim of systemic power structures than just a criminal. This shows that his persona is being redefined in different layers of popular culture commentary. Unofficial media like podcasts, personal vlogs, blogs, and open forums are creating a third space where Rick is neither a criminal nor a hero but a mirror reflecting the complexities of society, according to sociologist Linda C. McCrow of Harvard Kennedy School says that people are no longer looking for perfect examples, but rather people who have failed but still have a message to send. In this case, Rick, who was found guilty, may be reborn in culture as a cautionary figure. Even in the TV industry, some people at A Plus E Networks, the parent company of History Channel, say that talks have begun about the possibility of bringing back or changing the Porn Stars franchise. Rick Harrison would be the star of a documentary-style TV show that looks at the legal, moral, and social effects of former public figures. The show is still in its early stages and has not been officially confirmed. Rick Harrison could return to the public eye, but not in the same way he did before. Gone are the days of him smiling at antiques with his famous line, "The best I can do is." Instead, his future appearance may involve a show that talks about the dark side of no matter what form it takes. A lecture series on mistakes and responsibility in the world of celebrity. The public will decide whether Rick becomes a living example or a name forever etched in legal history. That's all for now. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay up to date on more behind the scenes stories of famous cultural cases. See you in the next video.